house I have ever heard of in my entire life. And that is saying something, I promise you, because I am not one to scare easily. But wait until you hear this haunted story. So in the middle of Hurricane Ian, we may be able to hear the wind whipping in the back. I thought it would be fun to record another instead of Haunted Ohio, where this is the most haunted. So we're going to start in Peru, and it seems like Peru has a lot of them. I've known some people from Lima, and I'll tell you what, for some reason or another, their ending was very tragic. And I just remember the legends that they would tell me about, and in some ways I thought that they were making some of this up, and then I started to actually research this myself, and it was I'm speechless. So I mean, a lot of times people say that this is the most haunted legend and house in South America, or in all of Latin America. I'm sorry. There is even a warning in every website that I've researched this on. So the legend, let's start with that. So there are a bunch of different variations of the Casa Matusita tale. Most seem to agree on the original story though. So let's begin there, because I want to give you the most correct version I can. And I apologize if I say any of these names incorrectly. So our legend, it's in the colonial era in Peru. A young woman named Tervaspa immigrated to Lima from Europe. Tervaspa was of Persian ancestry, and she soon became, of course, locally gossiped about as a witch. And she had magical powers. She was known to heal the sick. And back then, when you could heal the sick, you were considered to be a witch doctor or a witch. Or somebody with powers, which of course would always intimidate other people. Whenever you do something better or can do something great, people want to bring you down. So what happened was that the Spanish Inquisition was feared. They learned of this young lady and her powers. So she was taken into town and asked if she was a witch, and she said no, I'm just a healer. And she was literally tortured until she confessed to actually practicing witchcraft, which would, of course, back then sentence her to death. But as she was burned at the stake, it is said that she cursed the spot where she died with her final breaths. And you know what? I can't blame her. rich man built his house there. The man was influential, pretentious, and cruel to his servants. So, what happened? The servants began to get pissed off. They didn't like being treated so horribly. So they started to design this revenge on this whole plan against him, and waited patiently for the right moment to strike, dealing with this almost intolerable treatment of them. So he had a dinner party for a group of his business associates. So they were talking and laughing and having a great time, while the servants that had been so mistreated by this man took advantage of their master's occupation with his guests. So what they did was they put a hallucinogenic plant in the drinks, simply wanting to embarrass their master for his cruel and untimely behavior, unkind behavior. After serving the man and his guests the drugged refreshments, they waited outside the door up the dining area, waiting for something to happen. So minutes passed, and they began to hear laughter, and thinking that everything was going okay, the servants drew closer to the door to listen in to what was going on. And as their ears were pressed against the door, suddenly, out of nowhere, the laughter turned into loud noises and screams, terrifying screams of pain and agony, nothing like the servants had ever heard before. They stood there, paralyzed, listening to this. Sounded like a massacre going on behind the door. But then the screams stopped. And one of them dared to open the door. What they found was something that in all of the legends, in all of the books, everybody can agree that this is what happened. What happened is that as they slowly looked inside the room, they found all of the guests, including their master, ripped to pieces, arms and legs scattered about the floor, bodily fluids everywhere, all over the ceilings, all over the floor. The master and his guests had murdered each other with their bare hands in the most horrific, cruel way possible, with their own bare hands staring at each other like they were wild, rabid animals. They literally murdered each other by tearing off their flesh, and their eyes and their hair just ripping at each other, ripping. The servants, of course, completely because of what they saw that night. And they never recovered. They had such a PTSD, as we would call it today, that they literally never spoke, could never talk about what had happened. What had happened. And what they had seen. So this house sat quiet and abandoned for nearly 100 years. 100 years. That is a long time for a house to be abandoned. Now let's just think about that. If that house was abandoned for 100 years and didn't have some kind of something taking care of it, it would have just crumbled, right? But the house remained, I guess, very livable because Mr. Yoshida from Japan immigrated to Peru in Lima, and with his wife and children, they moved into the second floor where the brutal killings had happened 100 years earlier. Now they turned the first floor into a shop which fed the family, made money for the family, and they work there on a day-to-day basis to support themselves. But one day, Mr. Matsushita came home earlier than expected from his errands out in the city. As he walked up the 200-year-old staircase leading to the second floor, what he reported was that he heard moans and screams coming from the bedroom. He found his wife there with another man in his own bed. So instead of confronting her and discussing it or leaving her, he grabbed a knife from the kitchen and murdered both of them and his 2 children before killing himself. So a local priest tried to perform an exorcism of the house when a shopkeeper who was renting the first floor after this happened complained of strange noises above. The priest climbed the stairs and entered the very dark blackness that was never cleaned up from apparently the second murders. Very unkempt. Into the second floor living room. Within minutes, the man said that the priest began to scream, that he heard voices of tortured spirits. When his shouts ceased, he was found inside the house. Okay. Yes, he was found dead. The priest who tried to perform the exorcism couldn't even escape. After he heard these strange voices, he just shouted until he couldn't anymore. And so they ran upstairs where he was found dead. Now the coroner said that he died of a heart attack. But he was a pretty Humberto Vilches Vera, an Argentine TV personality, took up a dare to spend 7 nights inside the haunted second floor. After 4 hours, only 4 hours, he ran out, screaming, and spent the next 2 years in psychological care. Are these stories true? Well, there is a theory that goes around the locals in central Lima today. There is a theory about the legend of La Casa Matucita is told by these locals, and they say because the old United States Embassy in Peru was right across from the old house. The legend was invented to keep anyone from entering and spying on the embassy from the second floor. If this is the case, the legend has persisted long after and before the embassy moved to the area and after they left. So what happened to this house? This haunted Matucita house in 2016. Alright. It was taken apart completely and remodeled by the current owner, putting the future of the legend in question, right? Because, I mean, let's face it, some believe and some don't. So what would happen? The remodeling has taken away a large part of the fear and the mystery, of course, surrounding this place. This action, while probably necessary for safety reasons, may put the legend's survival in jeopardy. But the destruction of one legend, arguably Peru's most famous, could pave the way for much more to be uncovered. So, do you believe in this haunted house? Do you believe that just by remodeling the house, that only back in 2016, do you think that there will be more legends and tales and stories? I don't know. Ghost stories. Navajo Joe was driving home one night. A young Native American boy. This is a real incident to him that happened to this user named Navajo Joe when he was just a child. A cold December night. He was just a kid. This stack of firewood was nearing the bottom of my grandmother. And my grandmother knew it would not last till morning. She asked my uncle to fetch some more from the mountains. My uncle took me with them. And we drove off in his pickup truck. He chopped the wood and I stacked it as fast as I could, feeling something either trying to avoid something or trying not to see something. Just then, there was a tap on the window 3 times. I started to turn around, but my uncle shouted out of nowhere, don't look. I completely froze. My heart started beating rapidly. My uncle put his foot down on the accelerator and we began to gain speed. It was the first time I'd ever seen real fear on my uncle's face. There is another tap on the window beside me. Look at me, my uncle shouted, and do not turn around. Keep looking at me. Keep looking at me. I didn't know what was going on. My hands were sweaty, and tears started forming at the corners of my eyes. All of a sudden, I felt the truck tip as if something heavy had landed on it in the back. My uncle sped up even more and started praying loudly in our native language. I truly wanted to cry. I did. I wanted it to stop. Once again, I heard tap, tap, tap on the window behind. Just keep looking at me and do not turn away. Do you hear me? My uncle cried over and over. I could see he was on the verge of tears. He was driving faster and faster, pushing the engine to its limits. My heart was beating so rapidly I could hear it throbbing in my ears and out of my chest. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. It was starting to get hard for me to breathe. I shut my eyes as tight as I could, and I too started to whisper a prayer. I too started to pray. A minute or two passed and the truck tipped again. My uncle looked around and let out a deep sigh of relief. He slowed down and everything was quiet again. And all I could hear was the drone of the truck's engine and the crunch of the gravel on the dirt road. My uncle looked at me and said, we will have your father do a prayer in the morning so the evil will forget our faces. So the evil will forget our faces. I remember curling up on the seat and just staring at the clock on the dashboard. As I listened to my uncle sing an old prayer. But by the time we got back to my grandmother's house, wasn't really into him. So halfway through the meal, she was so bored that she was already thinking of excuses so that she could leave early. The waiter could tell that she was bored and kept smiling and winking at her. While my mom's date was in the restaurant, the waiter approached her and started asking her if she was okay. She explained she was on a blind date, but she wasn't having much fun. So, she was explaining to the waiter that she was on a blind date. It turned out that the waiter was just about to get off work, and he offered to give my mother a ride home if she waited another 10 minutes. She did consider it and was tempted to say yes, but just then her date came back from the restroom. She politely shook her head and smiled at the waiter and told him, "No thank you, no thank you." My mother and her date finished their meals and he drove her home safely. But that is not the scary part. The next night, my mom was watching the evening news. There was a news flash saying that a woman had been found murdered behind a restaurant the night before. She realized it was the same restaurant she had been at with our date. Then they said that the police had already caught the killer. A picture flashed up on the TV screen. And it was the waiter who wanted to take my mother home. Can you imagine if his mother had gone home with that man? Oh my god. Oh my god, that just scares me to death. Oh, that other woman does. Lemonade stand. This is like when we were little. We would always have lemonade stands by the side of the road. So 2 young boys decided to go sell lemonade by the side of the road, like we all did in the 80s, when it was apparently safe to be alone outside for hours on end without our parents checking up on us. They encountered a strange couple in a rusty old car. I grew up in a very small town in Montana, and during the summer my brother and I would sometimes sell lemonade by the side of the road. We did not make a lot of money, but we did have fun selling the lemonade to people who were passing by. One hot afternoon, my brother and I were standing at our lemonade stand when we noticed an old rusty car pass by us 2 or 3 times. At the time, it struck me as a little strange, a little creepy. Something gave me the heebie-jeebies. Eventually, the car slowed down and stopped right in front of our stand. There was a woman in the passenger seat, and she rolled down her window to talk to us. I saw she was really skinny with gray hair that was stained with this sticky, sickly yellow hue from way too much smoking. I could not see the man who was driving very well, Is your mom home? She is. Yeah, she's in the house, I said. The woman turned and looked at the man who was driving. He nodded, still staring straight ahead. The woman turned back to me and said, "Okay, I will have some lemonade." "That'll be 25 cents, I said as I poured her a glass. Poured her a glass, poured her a glass. As I poured her a glass. She rummaged around in her purse and I could hear her coins clinking, 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 clinking. But it took her forever to pull out any change. It was just 25 cents. But then she pulled out a $5 bill and held it out to me. But that is when I knew something was very wrong. An uncomfortable chill went through me. You know, the one you get when something isn't right and you just didn't do it. You know it's wrong. Why was she handing me $5 if she had so many coins rattling in her purse? I knew at that moment something didn't feel right. It never felt right. Just something was wrong. She even had the nerve to say, "I don't have any change." I knew that was a lie. And she says, "You can keep the change." And she croaked out, "Just come and take it. Come and take it." Her lips peeling back a fake smile and her yellow teeth that were not all there, slightly showing. I started to walk up to the car and reach out to take the $5 from her hand, because as a kid, $5 is a lot of money, but something still felt very, very wrong. And as soon as my fingers touched the $5, the woman suddenly grabbed me by the wrists and began pulling me into the car. I screamed my lungs out and my brother ran to the house, yelling for my mother. The man floored the accelerator and the car lurched forward. I fought with all my might and managed to wrench myself free from her grasp. The car stopped and the man got out, but I was already running for my life. My brother was pounding on the door, screaming. My mother rushed out, and I turned just in time to see the rusty old car speeding away. We told my mom what had happened, and she called the police. When my brother and I calmed down and went back to the lemonade stand, there was a $5 bill lying on the ground. We packed up the lemonade stand and put it away for good. Never to sell lemonade again. Ever again. Willowbrook State School is a very scary place in Staten Island, New York. Many years ago, it was an institution for children with mental disabilities. However, it was overcrowded and filthy, and many of the patients were abused. Eventually, it was closed down and abandoned. Today, the dilapidated are said to be haunted by the ghosts of the many children who died there. Willowbrook State School began as a hospital for mentally or the foster care agencies who were supposed to care for them, but instead discarded them like rubbish. However, the school became so overcrowded, and the employees were not able to control the patients anymore. They started locking these poor children in their rooms for extended lengths of time and forcing them to sleep on hard floors covered in their own feces and urine. Can you imagine? Many of the children were malnourished and underfed. Most of them ran through the halls dressed in ragged clothes or completely naked. Conditions began to become so bad that a lot of children contracted diseases and died from illness and malnutrition. Unable to deal with the situation, staff members, for some reason, began abusing the children physically to keep them quiet and in line. Some of the kids even wandered away from the institution and ended up dying in the surrounding woods with such horrific conditions. They were so overcrowded that they didn't even notice they were gone. So between 1963 till 1966, secret medical studies were even conducted on these children. Doctors infected them with hepatitis in order to study the disease. They were being used as human guinea pigs because nobody wanted them. Oh, this is so sad. When Senator Robert Kennedy visited the mental institution in 1966, he called it a snake pit and declared that Willowbrook State School is not fit for even animals to live in. He said that the patients there were living in filth and dirt, their clothing in rags, in rooms less comfortable and cheerful than the cages in which we put animals in the zoo. In 1971, funding to Willowbrook State School was cut drastically, which led to worse conditions. Local newspapers and TV stations began doing reports on overcrowding, the unsanitary conditions, and the physical and mental abuse of the disabled children, little children that nobody seemed to want for some reason. In 1972, I don't know if you all remember Geraldo Rivera. Well, I loved him. He would go undercover. So he reported secretly, by gaining access that nobody knew about into the Willow State School, by using a stolen key. Now, he managed to document the brutal and horrific living conditions with a camera crew. His report led to an immediate government inquiry, and lawsuits were filed against New York State. By the mid-1980s, Willowbrook School, the state school, closed down and many of its buildings were abandoned. Today, they lie vacant and in ruins, littered with old toys, lunch trays, and broken beds. Sometimes people hear disembodied footsteps echo in the deserted corridors. Others hear whispered voices calling out their names and the eerie sounds of children giggling in the hallways. One employee saw the ghostly figures of two children lurking in the building. probably trying to get her attention to help them out. Teenagers who trespass on the property often tell of tales of shadowy figures chasing them from the buildings. Two boys went exploring in the school at night. They were chased around the grounds by a dark figure. Eventually, they managed to run back to their house, where they looked out the window. They realized the shadowy figure had followed them home and was standing in their garden. They watched it from the window as the thing stood in front of their home until the sun came up. Oh my god, that would absolutely terrify me. In July 1987, the body of a young girl was discovered in a shallow grave on the grounds of Willowbrook State School. She had disappeared from her home a few days before. When police investigated, they found a homeless man named Andre Rand living in the makeshift shack nearby. Years before, he had been working as an orderly in Willowbrook State School. Witnesses reported seeing Rand playing with the missing girl on the day she disappeared. Police charged him with kidnapping and murder. He is a suspect in the disappearance of many other children in the area, but the police have been unable to prove his guilt. The newspapers call him the Hannibal Lecter of Staten Island. The Hannibal Lecter of Staten Island. Now that is truly terrifying. Terrifying. The end of a line. Now, to me, anything in Japan or folklore from Japan is spooky. I don't know what it is after seeing The Ring. And I was watching this spooky story the other day from there, and it was truly so disturbing. I had to turn it off. Now, when I have to turn off a movie, you know it's disturbing. That's how bad it was. So this is a story from Japan about a man who was involved in an accident and has a strange dream while unconscious. During the summer, my friend Beiko went mountain climbing. He lost his footing and fell off the steep cliff face. Luckily, he landed on a ledge and it saved his life. However, he was badly injured and had to be rescued. He had hit his head in the fall, and when they brought him to the hospital, he was still unconscious. The doctors examined him and found swelling in his brain. He had to have brain surgery immediately. They were in the operating room for hours, and they managed to reduce the swelling, but he was still in a coma. A few days later, he recovered, thank goodness, and I went to the hospital to visit him. He told me that while he was unconscious, he had a very strange dream. In the dream, Beiko found himself standing in a deserted train station. There was nobody else in sight. When the train pulled into the station, he got on board. There were no other passengers on the train. He was completely alone. After a long time, the train voice over the intercom. Over the intercom. Over the intercom. Next stop. Final stop. Next stop. End of the line. Something about the announcement frightened him terribly, to the point he jumped out of his seat and managed to get off to that train just as the doors were closing. And just at that moment, he awoke from the coma he had been in. The doctors told him that he was lucky to survive. For a while, he had been lingering between life and death, they said. While Baco told me about this dream, I could see he was becoming upset and his face was growing pale. He was growing pale. I asked him why it troubled him so much, and he said, "What if I hadn't gotten off at that train station? What would have happened? What would have happened if I stayed on the train to the end of the line?" He would not have made it back. Not have made it back alive. It was a good choice for him. A good choice for him to get off of that train when he did. Luckily. Trail of blood. Now this is a true, scary story about a teenager who goes out on a date with a girl in his class. The only problem is that he is terrified of her father. So when I was a teenager, my parents moved to a new town and I had to go to a new school. And that always sucks as a teenager. But there was one girl in my class who was really beautiful, and I could have given anything to go on a date with her. In one of our classes, the teacher paired us up for a project. So we were going to have spend time together alone. I figured my chance to finally ask her out. We worked on the project at her home, but when I found out where she lived, I began to second thoughts. She lived in a small cabin in the woods. Her mother wasn't around, and her father really creeped me out. He seemed totally insane. He never said a word to me and acted if I wasn't even there. He walked around in the cabin with his shirt off, drinking beer, chewing on tobacco, and carrying a shotgun in his hand. It seemed like the only thing he was interested in was hunting, but I wasn't sure what he wanted to hunt. The walls were lined with bear skins, animal heads, deer antlers, and skulls. It was so creepy, extremely creepy. At school, one of my friends told me that he had heard a rumor about the girl. He said that her father had killed the mother years ago, but the police were never able to prove it. So he had gotten away with murder. Apparently, the mother's body was found in the middle of town, riddled with bullet holes from a shotgun. He said the girl had to stay with her father because she had no other living relatives. The story really rattled me, but there was no way to find out if it She said yes, and it was a date. That night I drove her to her place to pick her up. She answered the door wearing a short skirt and had done her hair and put makeup on. She looked incredible. Just as we were about to leave, her father took me aside and spoke to me for the first time. And he growled in my ear, "You do know what will happen to you if you touch her right." Suddenly, the story about him murdering his wife was the only thing I could think about. I took the girl to the movies, and afterwards we went skating. All night her father's voice echoed in my mind, his threat, his strange whisper, the sincerity, I guess, terrified me of her father. He was going to kill me when we got back to her place, no matter what. I just could not get that thought out of my head. At the end of the night, I did drive her back home. When we got out to her house, she told me to park at the end of her driveway and turn off the headlights. She wanted to kiss. But at this point, I managed to forget all about her crazy father, and I leaned over and kissed her. But afterwards, when I turned the headlights back on, I noticed something strange. There was blood in the snow at the end of the driveway. At first, I thought I was just seeing things. She didn't seem to notice anything wrong, but my heart was throbbing, and I started to sweat. I wanted to say something so bad, but I didn't want to sound like a moron. There had to be a logical explanation for all this. I put the car in drive and started down the long, winding driveway to her house. The trail of blood seemed to be getting thicker and thicker and thicker. I became more and more nervous. She still said nothing. She was fixing her makeup in the mirror. I kept driving, but all I could see was this blood. A chill was now filling my body, my mind, my throat. I started pouring sweat. I finally turned the last corner as I pulled up to her house. The headlights illuminated a dark figure standing outside of her house. It was her father, covered in blood, and he was clutching a huge knife in his hand. And at his feet was a huge bowl of blood with something that looked like a body. Her father started to approach the car, but I completely freaked out and started to hyperventilate. Suddenly, tears were rolling down my face. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I even peed my pants. I just knew he was going to kill me. And as it turned out, he drove me to the hospital and said, because I was having a full-on panic attack. But later I found out that her father had found a bear at the end of the driveway and shot it. He dragged it to the house and was in the middle of skinning it when I pulled up. But I thought, that was a little strange. I also found out that, her mother wasn't really dead. She had just left. But we are still together to this day. And whenever I meet her father, he always brings up this incident and laughs at me, completely embarrassing me. But at least I survived. Because you never know, it could have turned out to be completely different. So I just wanted to say outside that seemed to be looking for her or at her. She felt so uncomfortable that she left the store without even purchasing the groceries she came to get. But when she saw the woman outside, the same woman that was walking around, kind of on the edge of the store as the guy followed her, she got so freaked out that she called her husband. And when her husband arrived, they both got in the same car and left. Then another woman who was reading next door up said that at Nordstrom's, the same thing. Gardens Mall and Nordstrom's, the same thing happened to her friend, and she literally showed the text that she was actually kidnapped by 3 men in a van. 3 men in a van. Luckily, she was kicked and screamed and got away and called the police. But literally was on the brink of being trafficked, I guess. So then this father spoke up and said that his 11-year-old son was on his way home in Palm Beach Gardens from school on his bike and was chased by a van of men. And luckily, the kid was smart and dumped his bike and ran into the woods, into their house. And then they called the police. But all 3 people in the last week here in Palm Beach Gardens were truly in danger. Then their true scary story could have been a lot worse of an ending. But I just wanted to let everybody know to be safe. Be safe and stop looking at your phones. Look around and pay attention. These people take advantage of those that do not pay attention, and apparently because of everything that's happening in the United States, that they are profiting from these situations. And I think the threat of this recession and all that's been on the news lately has just made people scarier, more angry. So just please be careful, because that is my little town here in South Florida. So just always be aware of your situation and your surroundings. Now, I'm not saying it just happens here, because I know it doesn't. I know it happens everywhere. But stay away, stay aware, stay awake. Make sure your kids have this police officer that commented that it's best if your child is riding their bike home from school that they need to have either mace or a taser that they need to learn how to use. If they're old enough to ride their bikes home from school, then they should be old enough to protect themselves and to know how to protect themselves. And he recommended that to go to your local police station and ask if there are classes or where they can get things to protect their children. So I just wanted to put that out there, because there are true scary stories every day that happen. There are true horror stories, there are true murders, there are truly terrifying situations that happen every good night.